Vincent Van Gogh is often portrayed as the archetypal tormented artist, but that is a provocative interpretation of history. It's a myth that his artistic talent was never recognized. If that was the case, why was he exhibited in Brussels alongside Cézanne and Renoir in 1890? In fact, the rumor that he only sold one painting his entire life is also untrue. So yes, most of what you know about Van Gogh is false, except for the ear cutting. That part is true. When people discuss romantic paintings, it's hard not to throw Van Gogh's Starry Night in there. No one would blame you for doing that, but did you know there is a much more sinister tale behind the famous painting? Ooh. Alright, no point in prolonging the mystery. Yes, the ear cutting is a major part of this story. One must look for me in the works I brought back from there, if one wants to know who I am, said Paul Gauguin upon his return from Martinique to Paris in 1887. Vincent and his brother, Theo, saw the paintings at a mutual friend's apartment. They were so taken aback by Gauguin's work that they paid more than they'd ever had for a painting before, 400 francs for his mango trees. This little anecdote serves to demystify Van Gogh's personality. His brother was an art dealer, and Vincent was introduced to many artists and critics regularly through him. Theo helped establish Gauguin as a major player by regularly exhibiting his work and even invited him to Arles to keep Vincent company. Vincent wanted to start an artistic collective down at Arles, a plan perhaps too ambitious for the young upcoming artist. Vincent was beginning to come into his own as an artist. Most of his famous paintings can be traced back to this era. Sharing a place in Arles ushered in an age of unprecedented creative vigor for Gauguin and Van Gogh. This was also the time when Vincent painted his large sunflower paintings. Amid some tension between Gauguin and the brothers, Vincent allegedly took a razor, threatened Gauguin, and desperately cut off his own ear. Modern research suggests that he might have had bipolar disorder, which brought on such manic episodes. In some of his later letters to his brother, Vincent implied that Gauguin had cut off his ear, saying, quote, "Luckily Gauguin is not yet armed with machine guns and other dangerous war weapons." Vincent was a late bloomer and started painting when he was around 30. During his time in Paris, he came into contact with the work of Monet, Pissarro, Renoir, Signac, Seurat, and Toulouse-Lautrec, to name a few, and established cordial relations with most of them. Their impressionistic styles had led him to an appreciation of unfettered expression. But that can't be all, can it? Of course not. At 30 years of age, Vincent was a dedicated autodidact, and he learned from whatever sources he could get his hands on. It is no secret that Japanese woodblock prints were making rounds in Europe at the time, which also played a massive role in Van Gogh's evolving style. He referred to the Japanese influence on his style as Japaneserie. They provided him with dark outlines in which he let his vibrant, almost manic touches wreak havoc. This brings us to the most readily apparent part of Van Gogh's visual vocabulary, the bright, expressive colors applied with thick impasto. After watching a ceiling mural by Eugene Delacroix at the Louvre, he became obsessed with its bright colors. So, he scoured books, trying to make sense of Delacroix's complex color theories. Despite appearances to the contrary, Vincent was a fairly cultured man and knew 4 languages. Combine the Japanese composition, the optimal mixing of the Impressionists, and the bold tones of Delacroix with boundless intelligence, and what have you got? Something like this, perhaps. Vincent was finding his artistic voice, but the incident at Arles forced him to leave for a remote mental asylum at Saint-Rémy. So here he is, torn away from the world and his dreams, and hearing voices inside his head. Theo Van Gogh ensured Vincent had tons of supplies and time to paint, and the uncharacteristically progressive asylum owner agreed to the stipulation. So while the 41 other prisoners screamed their woes out, Van Gogh gave visual expression to all he saw and heard. The seclusion provided him the focus to rejuvenate his creative juices, and he was allowed to move around the estate for research. Here's his first significant work at the asylum. As he sat in his bedroom, he had the chance to look out onto the landscape. While bars would have punctuated his view, they did not hamper his artistic outlet. He was not allowed to paint in his bedroom, so he would often do charcoal or ink sketches and outlines of the landscape when he was in there. He would move into a separate room with a different view to paint, so he often relied on his memory to hone a composition. He fiddled with various sketches, assimilating the two views in different ways. For instance, look at this painting. It is closer to how the landscape would have actually looked. And now, here's the Starry Night. Vincent was allowed to roam the estate freely at this point, so he made some preparatory sketches, taking in the shape and topography of the surroundings. He began experimenting with the nearby town's appearance, the times of the day, and the placement of the cypresses, which were becoming a running theme in his work at the asylum. The Starry Night was painted after another manic episode in which Vincent tried to consume turpentine and paint, and to be honest, it seems like he was still high on them. Just look at the entire frame swirling and moving rhythmically, enthralling us with its vision of the dazzling night sky. You might notice that he has brought the cypress tree much closer, framing the landscape like Japanese prints. Speaking of Japanese influences, we know that Van Gogh admired Hokusai's The Great Wave of Kanagawa. One only has to compare it with The Starry Night to see the resemblance of the composition. Whereas Hokusai's composition whirls the tempestuous tide, the Dutchman rotates the cosmos. Another interesting detail is that the town lay on the opposite side and was much larger. Vincent made almost 21 variations of his bedroom view, enhancing it with imagery from the surroundings, reducing it in other aspects. When he first painted The Starry Night, he deemed it a failure, a sentiment his brother shared. Had he lived long enough, he might have painted over it as he did with so many of his other failures. The attendants noticed an improvement in his condition whenever he painted. It seemed as if art was his lifeline to life. He had been an evangelical preacher at one point in his life, but later moved away from the throes of organized religion. In one of his letters to his brother, he gives us that oft-quoted line, quote, "But I always think that the best way to know God is to love many things." And one can certainly see that in his landscape paintings from the time. When he needed inspiration, he would spend his energy on the work of other artists. Was he copying them? Well, a little. He still painted in his own novel style. 21 of almost 30 such works were inspired by Jean-François Millet. He also copied, or more like adapted, the works by Eugene Delacroix, Gustave Doré, and Hiroshige. One can clearly see the influence of Japanese composition in his works. His famous Almond Blossoms seems like a natural evolution of his copies of Hiroshige's work. Vincent Van Gogh shot himself 2 months after his release from the asylum. The last few years of his life had been burdensome. He was incredibly prolific in the last 5 years of his life, to the point that most of his work that you'll see anytime soon belongs to that stage of his life. Just 6 months after his death, Theo Van Gogh also passed away. His death and the tale surrounding him set him on a path of posthumous fame and idolatry. If you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe. What is your favorite Van Gogh painting? Leave your answer in the comments below. Up next, check out our take on Madame X by John Singer Sargent.